these interest rate swaps and stuff, what does that still have to do with free markets, the free market economy?
I mean, I don't think there is a free market economy. The rules have been set up by the 1%, by the banks. They operate according to rules that they set up to benefit them. The idea that somehow there's a free market that's determining these transactions is just kind of ridiculous. I don't know anybody who takes one look at some of these transactions and some of these relationships who can think that there's any kind of free hand at work here. It's not true. We're in a particular phase of finance capitalism where these derivatives and these ways of extracting profit and extracting wealth from every corner of our lives, from education to transportation to medical issues, like that's how the economy works now, is every piece of our lives, wealth and profit must be extracted.
So can you explain again what is the municipal debt?
Well, municipal debt is really, for example, the interest rate swap debt that I just described, the $600 million, that's a kind of municipal debt. Numerous municipalities around the country, including New York City, are deeply in debt, are in the red, because they're not being funded. I mean, the federal government does not fund cities and towns anymore, right? They're kind of left to fend for themselves and to raise money to fund basic operations and to fund public services. So it really is a kind of American austerity where the federal government just cuts off funding and all of a sudden cities and towns are left and really the only thing they can do is take out loans from Wall Street. So that's what you see happening in communities across the country, and that's why municipal bankruptcies are all of a sudden becoming a threat. You have cities like counties in Jefferson County, Alabama, that declared one of the largest bankruptcies in U.S. history a couple of years ago, and it's just meant horrible austerity measures have been imposed on citizens. In Stockton, California, there was also a declaration of bankruptcy. Creditors are right now trying to get paid by taking money from the retirement program of California state workers. I mean, so what happens is these cities and towns get in debt, and then when they declare bankruptcy, that allows the vultures to descend, and Wall Street, they can void labor contracts, and Wall Street comes in and takes over public assets, privatizes things like water, things like public transportation. In Chicago, they privatized the toll road. So a public system of roads that you drive on is now a profit source for a private firm. So these are the kind of things that happen when cities and towns find themselves in debt. And that's what's happening almost everywhere across the country.
How can these cities and towns fight back?
Well, that's a good question. I think it goes back to what I was saying before about this idea that these debts are illegitimate and they're odious and they should not be paid back. It's about understanding which are the legitimate debts that we really owe and which are not. And that all debts do not deserve to be repaid. So I think it's a question of really changing the way we think and getting communities across the country to think, wait a minute, maybe these debts don't have to be paid. Maybe there's a way to refuse this debt. Maybe there's a way to insist that, you know what, we're going to fund our retirement systems and our pension systems and our schools and our hospitals, and we're not going to pay Wall Street banks.
And what would Wall Street do if you don't pay those debts?
That's a good question. I think they'll make a lot less money.
But is there any way they can enforce it?
Enforce what?
Paying the debt. Like, if you don't pay,
well,
what could happen?
I mean, I don't know. I think I'd have to know what you mean specifically. Like, if an individual doesn't pay, or if a...
Yeah, like cities. Like, let's say cities, we're talking... Yeah.
Actually, it's very serious. Last summer in Scranton, Pennsylvania, there was a parking authority just threatened. They didn't actually do it, but they threatened to default on a bond that was coming due, and the repercussions were quite serious. Wall Street essentially cut off their access to credit markets. So in a debt-financed economy, when cities and towns can't access credit markets, they essentially have no money. They cannot continue to fund basic operations. So when Scranton threatened to default on this bond, Wall Street cut off its access to credit markets, and all of a sudden the city had no money, and so their reaction was to cut all public workers' pay down to minimum wage. So teachers, firefighters, police, all public officials, everybody was suddenly making $7.25 an hour, and this is what their reaction. So it's, again, if you challenge Wall Street, they're not going to be very nice in return. They cut off your access to money in the case of municipal debt, and all of a sudden, you know, you're making $7.25 an hour if you're a school teacher. Now, in the case of Scranton, the public unions did sue, and later on, their wages were restored. But this was a long process, a long drawn-out process, and it's scary because other municipalities see this, and they see what happens if you try to challenge Wall Street. I mean, that's one reason the MTA feels like it can't challenge Wall Street with regard to these interest rate swaps.
So what can we do then? I mean, if they bring on their iron fist when we resist, then what can we do?
I think that's the question. That's what we're working on. I mean, we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But this is about a social movement. It's about asking those questions. That's the right question. It's about working on the answer together. It's about awareness. It's about public education. It's about shifting the debate from, you know, this idea that the debtors are at fault and they've done something wrong, to a different kind of debate, which is which kind of debts are legitimate, which are illegitimate, and how can we challenge the kind of regime of Wall Street together.